I worked as a flight attendant for a few years when I decided to take an extended sabbatical from college. There were a handful of bad situations that I'd encountered, but one in particular still makes my skin crawl more than any other. I was born and raised in Texas, but had moved to New York when I was 21. So when I found out at the beginning of a week-long trip that I'd have a couple of overnights in Austin, I was super excited to go to my home state for a few days. My brother lived just north of the city, and we planned to hang out and go to dinner the night that I had arrived when he got off work. And the following day, we were going to meet up with our dad who lived about an hour away. So I get to the hotel downtown, the crew and I check in, and then we each head off to our own rooms. A short elevator ride and I get to mine. We're not even 5 minutes later, there's a loud hard knock on the door. It was only around 1 or 2 p.m. and I hadn't called either my dad or brother to let them know that I was in town yet, so they wouldn't know what room. I assumed it was maybe one of my crewmates, so I headed to the door. Before even making it to the door, however, a loud, male voice on the other side boomed. "The front desk sent me about the bathroom problem you called in," before trying to open the door. "Unlock the door and open up. Miss, I need in, now." I froze in my tracks. I hadn't even been in the bathroom yet, let alone called anything to the front desk. I'm a petite chick, and while I'd take no crap from anyone despite my size, I still err on the side of caution. Slowly inching toward the door to look out the people, all I could tell was that the man on the other side was at least 6 feet tall, and easily over double my weight. No way I was going to unlock that door. I responded to the guy, telling him he must have had the wrong room. He continued pounding on the door while constantly turning the handle, telling me no, he needed in, and he was getting in the room one way or another. I panicked, but thankfully had the sense to grab the phone and call the front desk. The concierge confirmed that they had neither sent anyone up to my room, nor had they received a call about the bathroom. The entire time this guy was still determined to get in my room, pounding and yelling. Lucky for me, the front desk had dispatched security to my floor. When these security officers stepped off the elevator a few seconds later, I could hear them in the hall approach and ask the guy who he was, what he was doing, and telling him that he needed to leave the hotel. He immediately gets hostile and aggressive toward them, and the front desk clerk I'm still on the phone with tells me police have been called and that they're on their way. In the meantime, I'm trapped in my room, scared out of my mind. Long story short, the cops show up pretty quickly and manage to arrest the guy for trespassing and criminal menacing or something. I later found out that the guy was also wanted in connection to a string of break-ins in Austin. He had seen and stalked me from the minute that I had entered the hotel lobby. Apparently, I was exactly his type of victim. Nothing else happened after that, but it still rattled the heck out of me for the rest of my stay in that hotel. 2 years ago, my husband and I flew to LA for a weekend getaway. We stayed at a boutique hotel off of Sunset. It's more of a hipster type place. Not normally somewhere I would stay, but it was nice, clean, and had a good vibe. We met up with our friends who live in LA and went out for dinner and drinks. It was a late night and we came back to the hotel. I was exhausted and jet lagged. It was around 1:30 in the morning or something like that. My husband is a very deep sleeper. I'm an extremely light sleeper, except when I've had a bunch of drinks, which I had definitely consumed that night. So it was lights out for both of us very quickly. Around 3 a.m., I only know the time after everything has happened, I wake up suddenly and open my eyes. There's a light on in our room. The room had been totally dark when we went to bed. The light came from the doorway, which illuminated the silhouette of a man standing at the foot of the bed, just standing there staring. For a moment I'm speechless, confused and also slightly intoxicated. I haven't yet moved. My reaction is delayed, and then the stark fear and reality kick in. I gasp and say, "What the heck?" The man was wearing a red plaid shirt and had dark hair and a beard. I couldn't make out his features as my eyes were adjusting to waking up, and the lighting that illuminated him shadowed half of his face. The man says, "I need to speak with Drake." I know this may sound somewhat comical, but I assure you at the time it was terrifying. I scream, "Get the heck out!" which jolts my husband awake, who immediately sits up and sees a man at the foot of our bed. My husband is 6'5", which may not be evident given half his body is underneath the bedding, but either way, the man responds, "Oh, sorry, wrong room," and bolts out, slamming the door behind him. My husband jumps up and runs for the door, but I stop him from going outside into the hallway. Who knows if the man is waiting there trying to lure him out, or whether there are other men out there ready to pounce. I keep looking through the people, but don't see anything. At this point, we are both shocked and in disbelief and probably still drunk. We call down to the front desk. No one answers. We call repeatedly and still, no one answers. We contemplate what to do, and around 20 minutes later, we decide to get dressed and go down to the front desk. There is an employee at the front desk, and there's also a bar in the lobby. My husband walks around to see if he can spot the guy who was in our room, and as he's searching, I go up and start telling the guy behind the front desk what had happened. But as I begin the story, I burst into tears. I realize how shaken up I am. The employee gets the manager and he asks me what time the man came in the room and so on. But I don't know how long he was standing there until I woke up and saw him. I think he must have been there for a long time, just waiting for me to wake up. My husband also came back empty-handed. We got back up to the room, and the next day, the manager calls and says that there wasn't anything on the security cameras. I didn't believe him. He offers us one free night at the hotel as compensation, even though he claims he didn't see anything. We take the free night because what else is there to do? We just want to go about the rest of our mini vacation. Why was this man in our room? How did he have a working keycard? But the thought that I had the most trouble with, what would have happened if I hadn't woken up? Our door was locked, but clearly someone had a duplicate keycard. And here's what I've learned. If you don't already, always put the deadlock on your hotel room door. It's something we've never thought to do, and now I always check it, twice. I am and have always been a very small girl, standing at 4'11", full grown now at 27. And I've always been able to pass as being much younger than I am, especially if I'm not wearing any makeup. When I was a small child, about 7 or 8, my father bought a little cabin in a town in Texas called Livingston, in an area of Livingston called Onalaska. I specify because of the second part of the story. Anyone with kids needs to be wary of the area. The cabin was really nothing remarkable at only 600 square feet. It was really just one giant room, a teeny kitchen the size of a normal bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a large closet, and a porch out front. The whole property consisted of 2 lots, so there was plenty of space, but the cabin itself was dinky. This whole area was in a strange mix between backwoods and suburbia. It was a true neighborhood, but not the prim and neatly kept neighborhoods I was used to in suburbia Houston. Despite this, it became a very fond place for me, and some of my greatest memories in life are at that cabin, including my evacuation story from Houston during Hurricane Rita. That is a story for another day. Anyways, around 11 to 12 years old, my father bought me a 4-wheeler, and the little lake town suddenly became a lot bigger. I didn't go super far, but I definitely ended up going further than I had ever gone before. And it was quite common to see me zipping up and down the roads with a pile of neighborhood kids on the back of the 4-wheeler when we would go up to the lake house on weekend visits. This was around 2001 to 2002, so cell phones were a thing. but it was still common for people not to have them. Usually I had a beeper that I carried around, but with no phones at the lake house, my father gave me a walkie-talkie with a very long reach instead. Looking back on it now from a world of cell phones, this seemed like a bad idea. This was a small town and we had spent so much time here that it felt safe. So one of these weekends, I was buzzing around my neighborhood like I usually did, and I stopped at this peninsula that overlooked the lake. This was a set of docks that us kids always came to when we wanted to swim, despite the very real threat of giant alligators. But being stupid kids, we really didn't worry about that. And I was overlooking the lake when my walkie-talkie buzzed to life. Naturally thinking it was my parents trying to reach me, I answered quickly. I couldn't quite make out what they said at first, so I tried confirming that it was my dad. At this point in the neighborhood was a little ways away from the cabin, but I had reached my parents from this point before, so despite the fact I could not quite recognize the voice, I assumed it was my dad. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it was off enough that I remember being slightly annoyed. Garbled questions that I had answered, but no answers that would have hinted at who I was or where I was. Eventually, the conversation started to drift in a way that I knew something was off, but I was not alarmed just yet, as my dad was notorious for pulling pranks on me and goofing around. I kept talking stupidly. Alarm bells weren't going off yet. Finally though, the guy on the other end of the walkie-talkie makes a comment. I cannot for the life of me remember what he said exactly, but it was enough to make me doubt that it was my father. This is when things took an extremely creepy turn. Bear in mind, I'd been talking to this guy pretending to be my father for a good 15 minutes, sitting on my four-wheeler on this peninsula. I can see you. You should come take a ride in my boat, he said. My father had a boat, but this was so out of character that it made me realize that it wasn't my father. Dad, you're not Dad, are you? What are you talking about? He said. If you can see me. I started feeling a bit peeved that this guy had been messing with me. What am I wearing? He paused for a second before the walkie crackled to life, and he said very clearly, You're wearing an orange shirt. You have red hair and you're sitting on a red four-wheeler right by the swim docks. Why don't you come for a ride in my boat? At this point, my eyes widened and my blood ran cold. This entire time, some strange guy that I didn't know had been watching me from God knows where. It took me maybe 10 seconds to look around wildly and then kick the four-wheeler up and race out of there so fast that the wheels had a hard time catching the ground. I remember the wheels spun out against the gravel beneath them, and when the four-wheeler finally started moving, little me had a hard time holding on. I floored it the entire way home, stopped in the middle of the yard and burst into the house. Obviously, the first thing I did was ask my parents if they had contacted me, which they had not and hadn't for hours. I was in such a panic that there was no way my dad wouldn't have convinced had it been him. He was a practical joker, but he knew when the fun was over. I hate to think what might have happened had I continued sticking around the area, or if I hadn't figured out that it wasn't my dad pulling my leg. Nothing came of this incident though, and my childhood up there resumed as normal. Eventually, the weekend visit stopped, but the story doesn't end there. During my parents' divorce, I moved to live at the lake house permanently with my father, or at least until we could find something better. This was the only place that we could go when he left my mother, which is a long story in and of itself, but I won't get into that. My father had recently suffered from health issues, so I took a job at a nearby gas station, tobacco barn, to pay the bills and let him recuperate. Thankfully, the lake house had no bills save for electricity, water, and internet, so my small salary was enough to keep us going. I only worked there for 3 months, but those 3 months were by far the creepiest that I'd ever experienced. Within the first month, a rather tall and obese man became infatuated with me, and he couldn't have been creepier. He had a short crew-cut hair and a slightly unkempt beard and mustache combo. The first time that we ran into each other, he stared at me with these wide, crazy eyes, got his gas, and just stood there for 2 or 3 solid minutes, just staring. When I asked him if I could help him, he said nothing. Now, the part of the tobacco barn I worked in was strictly the gas side, and I was pretty much in a glass box with an opening to take people's money and give them their cigarettes, which I could not have been more thankful for. Several times this man came to visit, and he would leave to pump gas after staring at me awkwardly. About the 4th or 5th time, after I thought that he had left, I heard a knock on the other side of the barn on the glass. And there he was, face pressed against the glass, staring at me with this wide, manic grin, and waving at me with his fingers. It was enough to send me running for my manager when he left, demanding to go on break before I peed myself. The last time that I saw him, I will never forget though. It has been etched into my mind so deeply that I doubt bleach could scrub it away. He arrives as he usually did and orders his gas. This time, however, he reached through the hole in the glass and grabbed my hand before I could put the cash away in the cash register. It wasn't a violent grab, but it was firm enough to keep me from pulling away. Being a very sheltered 18-year-old, I froze in place. "I love you," he said, refusing to let go of my hand. I simply stared at him, unnerved and alarm bells ringing in my head. "Say it." "What?" I responded. "Say you love me." Naturally, I just wanted this guy to go away. And being so freaking scared out of my mind at this point of him, I stammered and I said it out of impulse. Maybe he would let me go and go away. "I love you," I said uneasily. "Call me if you need anything." "What's my number?" he asked again. This threw me off completely, and the look on my face probably gave away my confusion, because he repeated himself, despite my stammering that I did not know. Finally, he said something that made my blood run cold. I felt like I was going to throw up. "It's 911. He winked. This guy was the sheriff deputy, the person that I would have to call if I got into any sort of trouble in town. The person that I would have to call if I had a medical emergency, or if someone tried to rob me. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. I just nodded, trying to keep myself from shaking bad enough for him to feel it. He had never pulled up in a police car or anything, but when I talked to my manager, she confirmed what he said as being true. Once he did let go of me and went on his way, I retreated to the back and demanded to be relieved from the gas station area. I didn't care. I did not want to see that guy ever again. Thankfully, we moved soon after, so I never had to. But I will never forget the leering grin that man gave me every single time he purchased gasoline. You would think moving away would be the end of the story, but no. It got even worse when I went to college, and you wouldn't think that would be the case considering I was in Galveston. I needed to go to my counselor to discuss a few things, and this usually involved about 30 minutes of chit-chat, as me and my counselor had become close while I was attending school. During one of these chats, which my father had attended due to him attending school in the same classes as it was in an effort to finally get his degree, I mentioned Onalaska, Texas, and how we had owned a lake house up there. Initially, the happy expression left my counselor's face. She informed me that she had been a social worker in that area for quite a few years. And suddenly my childhood playground took an extremely dark turn, and the sheriff at the gas station became a nightmare. Apparently that area was notorious for kidnappings and other horrible incidents. Whole neighborhoods, including police officers, were in on it, and it was common for people trying to out the incidents to either going missing or to be completely thrown out of the community through intimidation tactics. She proceeded to tell me of several cases she had worked on, careful to leave out confidential details of course, including incidents of entire families being in on the whole mess. When I told her about the sheriff that I had encountered, she kind of paled and wouldn't tell me anymore, except that she wasn't surprised. The conversation went on for over an hour and a half, but it was enough to make me never want to return to the small town that I had called my childhood summer home, and vowed to never ever bring any children I might have in the future there. So did the guy that intercepted my walkie-talkie signal and tried to lure me onto his boat. And to the creepy sheriff, let's never meet again. For the love of God, please.